Will you stop, Dave?
This film was released a year before the moon landing and 10 years before the first ever Star Wars movie. When I first saw this film, I thought, are we already a multiplanetary species in this movie? But the truth is, we just hadn't seen our own planet from space yet. So, how did he create a film that looks futuristic 50 years later? And the answer is a madman's obsession and 4 years of engineering miracles that swallowed 2/3 of the total film budget and 1,000 crew members and 18 months of painstaking visual work to create a vision of space that felt more real than reality itself, adapting all techniques, inventing new ones, and rewriting the rules of cinema forever.
You wanted it to look realistic, although we had no idea what on earth things would look like.
This isn't just a story of a movie. It's a story of a film that should have collapsed under its own ambition. It's about how far one director wanted to bring the impossible to life and how it changed cinema forever. Everything started with a letter and a question. It's a letter to Arthur C. Clarke, proposing a collaboration in what Kubrick described as the proverbial really good science fiction movie.
In praise of Arthur C. Clarke, I think the most poetic science fiction writer. He is scientifically the best informed. His narrative ideas, I think, are, for my tastes, the most appealing.
This was just 2 months after the release of the Doctor Strangelove film about the absurdity of nuclear annihilation.
Or how I learned to stop worrying and
love the bomb.
And now he wanted to go further. Not satire, not irony, but wonder, awe, mystery, and touch something cosmic, not monsters, not lasers. He wanted a Space Odyssey, and even borrowed the title from Homer. For the Greeks, he said, the vast stretches of the sea must have had the same sort of mystery and remoteness that space has for our generation. And unlike all other Kubrick movies, this film was not based on a novel. Not really.
And Stanley decided that the best way to produce the film was to write a novel, or at least the outline of a novel first. We finally settled on one short story originally called The Sentinel, which is about the discovery of an artifact on the moon, which had been left there millions of years ago by some other civilization, and which I suggest was a kind of burglar alarm to trigger the news that we had escaped from our planetary cradle and were about to invade the universe.
It's an unprecedented situation that someone would write an essential original literary work based on glimpses and segments of a film that he had not yet seen in its entirety. That was Kubrick's point. He didn't want clarity, he wanted a feeling. He wanted the audience to be dropped into the unknown, to experience something they couldn't explain but couldn't forget, a visual ritual.
The best way that I can begin to explain it is to paraphrase Stanley Kubrick, who said once to someone who asked, "What is this film about?" He said, "How do you explain a Beethoven symphony? You can't. You experience it. And your experience may be completely different than mine because you bring a whole different persona to that experience."
105 visual effects shots, a decade of scientific literature devoured, dozens of NASA consultants, filmed so rigorously researched that NASA itself called it perhaps the most truly and accurately researched film in screen history. Kubrick wasn't making a film to explain space. He was trying to explain us. To reach beyond reason and build something sacred, a cosmic myth for a species that had just begun to crawl beyond its cradle. And that's why this film should have been impossible to make. And it starts with the most unpredicted opening for an epic like this. 3 whole minutes of black screen. And it opens with the nearly best title sequence ever made for a movie. Shot of the moon, Earth, and the sun, all aligned behind one another, till it opens its eye to the dawn of man. With apes, with another mystery. A film about the future starts in the distant past. On the barren, sun-bleached plains of Earth, there is no dialogue, no exposition, just the bare essentials. Light, sound, motion. We meet a tribe of early hominids, fragile and defenseless, scavenging for survival, outmatched, hunted, living on the brink of extinction. Then it appears, a smooth, black monolith. Motionless, alien, perfect. The sun hasn't even risen yet, but after the apes touch the monolith and we jump to the low angle of the sun at suddenly high up in the sky rising from behind it. It doesn't speak, it doesn't move, and yet it changes everything. In one of the most astonishing sequences in film history, evolution is sparked not by biology, but by something unknowable. Instincts cracks open like a skull. That subtle tilt of the head, the moment of realization, of understanding, and this is our first main clue in the puzzle. And with a single audacious cut, nearly the most famous cut in cinema history, and it almost didn't happen because nothing about the dawn of man is simple. It was the last scene Kubrick filmed, not the first, but it was by far the most difficult, the most physically demanding, the most impossible. And instead of dragging a production to the desert, Kubrick brought the desert to a sound stage. Terrifying of flying, Kubrick never left the UK. Instead, he directed a second unit crewed remotely across continents by phone. The results, dozens of giants crystal clear 8x10 transparencies, not background plates but tools for one of the cinema's boldest optical illusion, front projection. He built a massive reflective screen 40 by 90 feet and projected the African landscapes onto it using a two-way mirror. The camera shot through the glass, aligning the projection so precisely that the image wrapped seamlessly behind the actors without a single visible shadow. The platform itself was motorized and rotating, allowing the entire set to move around the camera so they could shoot from different angles without touching the projection rig. This isn't filmmaking, this is precise engineering. And then there were the apes. You would think that was the easiest part, isn't it? It's just the costume of an ape that you can buy on a Christmas Eve. I don't know why you would do that, but it wasn't simple. And here is why. That stuntman, mimes, trained, studied, obsessed Dan Richter, who played Moonwatcher, filmed apes in zoos for months. He learned their patterns, their stillness, their emotional triggers. Not just how they looked, but how they thought. Every twitch, every glance, every hesitation was mapped. Now comes the suits, and you think that's the easiest part of all. They were custom built, with articulated mouth, elongated limbs, subtle facial mechanics. The actors boiled alive under 100 Fahrenheit studio lights. Medics was standing by, and the moment Kubrick said cut, they would rush to give them oxygen through tube. But the realism didn't end there. The zebra, imagine pouring a dead horse body under 100 Fahrenheit studio lights. And the leopard, it was real and unrestrained. There was a tranquilizer gun pointed just off camera. A perfectly crafted illusion designed to ask questions rather than answer them. What pushed us to evolve? Was it necessity, violence, or something beyond our comprehension? Kubrick offers no conclusions, just a black shape, a scream, a weapon, and a cut. One of the most powerful cuts in cinema history, called Silent. Perfect. A single frame linking humanity's first weapon to its last. In that one cut, Kubrick condenses 4 million years of evolution, from a tribe's first kill to a latest weapon floating through space, from survival to control.
If there was a conventional way to do it, forget that and think of something else. Go 180 degrees in the opposite direction.
Kubrick didn't just imagine space. For 2000 Space Odyssey, he recreated it. He wanted his audience to feel as though they were watching documentary footage from the future. And to achieve that, he had to build space from scratch. There is no atmosphere in space, as you know. No friction, no sound, no up and down. Kubrick internalized this and turned it into visual law. The vast emptiness of space in 2001 Space Odyssey isn't just black, it's terrifying terrifyingly still. Ships glide, not roar, movement happens in a complete silence. There are no stars zipping by, only distant. And just like NASA, Kubrick's team had to solve physical problems instead of using cinematic shortcuts. Building the ships, rather than designing spaceships to look cool, Kubrick wanted them to look plausible. That meant long, thin forms, visible heat radiators, thruster replacements, communication dishes. Every feature had to serve a purpose. The result, ships like the Discovery 1, Orient Shuttle, and Space Station V. The models themselves were massive. The Discovery 1 model was over 50 feet long, with thousands of handcrafted details. The Orient Shuttle and Moon Bus were built with functional lighting, surface weathering, and working components that could move on camera. In the moon landing sequence, as the Ares ship slowly descends into the massive Clavis hangar, we see tiny human figures moving around inside the base. Though it's vast, curved windows, the base is clearly a model. But those people, they move, they walk, they seem alive. How? Kubrick inserted pre-filmed footage of real people walking, working, or interacting, and Rare projected it into tiny screens embedded into the miniature model.
A lot of the shots that are done in the film are actually created on the animation stand, not on the model filming stand. The elements are brought together and animated along the paths that they've determined, all in basically 2D. They would have a cutout of the ship that is a large format photograph of the ship, and they could choreograph it in a certain movement and have the background, whether it's stars or the earth, move in sort of counterpoint to it. They were able to do a lot of those shots that way. You can sort of tell in the movie where that is done because there's not a lot of parallax or change of angle of the models, but they're still amazingly beautiful and incredibly choreographed.
For nearly 25 minutes into the film says nothing. It just shows, waits. Then finally, a voice.
Here you are, sir. Main level, please.
The first words spoken in 2001: A Space Odyssey are mechanical, polite, and utterly unremarkable. A standard elevator exchange. Except it's happening in space, and that's exactly the point. In this future, space travel is mundane. Colonizing the heavens has become a matter of bureaucracy. The awe we might expect is buried beneath sterile routine. A conversation about sandwiches and flight protocols. Kubrick doesn't hand us the grandeur of the cosmos. It withholds it, and in doing so, he reveals something deeper. The further humanity ventures from Earth, the more it seems to lose its sense of wonder. Technological advancement doesn't lead to emotional enlightenment. It leads to silence, repetition, detachment. Emotions are smoothed out like polished surfaces, but beneath the calm lies a haunting suggestion. Have we evolved, or have we simply upgraded? This isn't a film about technology, it's about alienation. It's about change, evolution, consciousness, and where we are going. Where is this species is heading? Gravity is a tyrant, Kubrick once said, and he wanted to dethrone it, but with what weapon? A 38-ton steel centrifuge costing $750,000 in 1968. Actors didn't act inside it now, they survived. They were fighting for their life. They learned to walk against the centrifuge pull. Their bodies tilting like drum on a tilting ship. Cameras bolted to the drum's ribs, turned ceiling into floors and walls into abyss. One misstep, you would crack your rib. One loose bolt, the whole machine would have torn itself apart. But Kubrick wasn't satisfied with merely simulating gravity.
There's one shot, which is an amazing shot, all within one frame, where Gary is at the top of the wheel up here, and there's a hub here, and you see me climbing. He's eating up here, sitting at a table. I climb down a ladder from the hub to the bottom of the wheel, get some food, and apparently, because it's all one frame, walk.
That little tiny simple shot with Keir walking up to me took us about 3 or 4 days to finally get. I had blue, yellow, and green food, and I stuck a fork into it, and it fell 65 feet to the bottom of the centrifuge. End of that day.
I was standing 2 stories up on top of a platform, off camera, next to a circus roustabout who was wearing very thick gloves. The camera was on the floor 2 stories down. And on action, when they blasted the smoke, I jumped head first toward the camera. I had a wire under my costume that had a huge knot in it, and when that knot reached the gloved hands of the circus guy, he jumps off and hurtles, and I go hurtling back up like a block and tackle. Luckily, we did it in 1 take, and Stanley's the only director that I would have done that for, I promise you.
Is when the stewardess is on the Ares, and she just sort of walks up the side of the wall and then walks into the cockpit, even though the orientation of the cockpit is somewhat different than the interior of the miniature.
She's basically walking in place, but the illusion is that she's walking, flipping upside down and changing her orientation. So another magical moment.
The floating pen. It's simple prop, really, this time.
So we devised a rig, which was a large circular sheet of glass surrounded by steel and bearings so that we could rotate the sheet of glass. And then we had some double-sided tape, newly invented, and we put the pen on the with the double-sided tape on the glass, and then we rotated the glass so it floated in space. The stewardess then was walking down the corridor between the seats. She came up and grabbed hold of the pen and walked off. She had to use stiction, to get rid of the stiction of the double-sided, so you can actually see her pull it off the glass if you look carefully.
And there is nothing comparing to the moon landing sequence. We didn't go to the moon, Kubrick did. The conspiracy theorists got one thing right. Kubrick got the moon landing looks too real. The surface, plaster a coconut shells, ground to dust and flicked with wet brushes until the craters looked ancient. But the real magic lived in front projection. Behind the actors loomed a 40-foot screen, projecting Kubrick's own footage of Arizona's desert, now painted gray, their shadows stretched to mimic lunar noon. And then there was the monolith, buried in a 60-foot bed, built upward from the studio floor. The 12-foot obsidian slab loomed like a god's coffin. Crew members forgot they were indoors. When the actors touched the monolith, it absorbed them, warping their features into something primal, something secret. When it finally worked, the set fell silent. Not a clap, not a breath howling through the speakers. A director who risked bankruptcy, sanity and lives to chase a vision no one else could see. 2001 didn't just predict space travel, it invented it. Every scene, a funeral for the word impossible. So the next time you look up at the moon, remember, Kubrick got there first. And from the barren silence of the moon to the clinical hum of deep space, the journey narrows inward again to HAL 9000, the film's most haunting creation. While the lunar sequences showcase Kubrick's talent for large-scale simulation, HAL is the inverse. A character made monumental by reduction, a red eye, a soft voice, and unsettling calm. That's all Kubrick needed to build cinema's first existential machine. The eye, HAL's singular presence. HAL didn't need a face, only a gaze. One that never blinked, never looked away. But the real genius was in the voice. Kubrick reportedly rejected over 40 actors before settling on Douglas Rain, a Canadian stage performer whose reading of the lines felt neither robotic nor overtly emotional. It was measured. Rain recorded the entire performance in one overnight session, never knowing he was voicing one of the cinema's most iconic characters.
The fact that Hal is every bit as much a main character. In fact, in some people's view, probably the main character for many people, which is fine. And I think, well, in a funny way, I think Stanley was also making comment that at times the people, certainly the astronauts, become, in a sense, more machine-like. Or as machine-like.
That's a very nice.
As the machines. And I think that's another reason that he had us
improved a great deal.
Underplay as much as we did.
Can you hold it a bit closer?
Sure.
That's Dr. Hunter, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Even Hal's final moments are saturated with technical mastery. As Dave Bowman disables the AI, he pulls memory blocks from a glowing wall of IBM 1790 circuitry. Real boards salvaged from MIT labs. Each memory cell was crafted from backlit plexiglass. The room seemed to breathe its last. Then came the song, Daisy Bell. Hal's dying lullaby wasn't just a poetic choice, it was historical.
Daisy, give me your answer to.
The idea of Daisy Daisy originates from a friend of mine, Dr. John Pierce, who was at the Bell Telephone Labs and experimenting with speech synthesis. And this must be perhaps 30 years ago, but one of the first computer songs sung very mechanically by a computer was Daisy Daisy. And I don't know where the recording is, but it should be interesting to dig that out.
Blurring the line between fiction and prophecy. By the end of the scene, Hal is no longer an antagonist. He's something stranger, a reflection, a mirror held up to us, asking if intelligence without empathy is still human or something else entirely. And so, the film leaves Hal behind, not with a bang, but with a melody, as if to say, even the most advanced minds are still haunted by the first songs they ever learned. After Hal's final breath, the film breaks free, literally and metaphysically. Logic gives way to sensation. Bowman enters something so meticulously haunting, so psychedelically feeling, enters a sequence called Stargate. Kubrick takes us into not another set, but into unknowable. The Stargate sequence doesn't just depict travel, becomes it. This wasn't just a visual effects as ornament, it was a visual effects as transcendence. The idea stemmed from an early experiment of John Whitney, a pioneer in computer-generated imagery, whose 1961 analog machines produced abstract animations using sine waves and oscillators. Inspired, Kubrick tasked his team with building a physical realization of these concepts. A 20-foot-long slit-screen rig, the camera mounted on a 30-foot track, crawled forward with its shutter held open, aimed at the rotating pans of etched glass. These glass sheets, cut by hand into fractal-like patterns, refracted light from shifting color gels, manually adjusted between each frame. It was analog hypnosis. Each single frame took up to 15 minutes to expose. But for Kubrick, even that wasn't enough. In a blacked-out aquarium, technicians poured hundreds of gallons of oil, paint, and alcohol mixtures into swirling layers. The fluid dynamics filmed at 120 frames per second, were then inverted, color-timed, and overlaid with traveling star fields.
The diamond shapes floating in this weird kind of almost liquidy landscape were taking 35mm prints of the Stargate sequence and projecting them onto little triangle-shaped facets of these diamond-shaped tetrahedrons. So each facet of the tetrahedron is actually a movie being projected onto a white plastic tetrahedron. So it would be one pass, the camera gets wound back, the projector gets moved to the other side, another exposure, on and on and on, over multiple tetrahedrons, and it just took hours and hours and days of photography to transpose those movies onto all those facets. The surface below was an extrapolation of the slit scan technique. Instead of having the slit, which created this perfectly flat wall, which was either horizontal or vertical at times, I took the slit and hid it from the camera, but allowed you to see the slit as a reflection off of a bumpy cylinder of plexiglass, mirrored plexiglass. So what happened was that the camera's still doing the slit thing and moving in and out and taking a minute to shoot each frame of film, but instead of it being absolutely flat, it was an irregular reflection off of a drum that was rotating. And this created this kind of liquid, turbulent terrain that look like water or look like land or look like sand or look like something.
These visuals weren't designed to meet something. They were designed to feel like falling into a dream or being born. The effect costs over 150,000 per minute of screen time, and yet no one questions the expense. It was the center of the film's mythology, slowed to near ambient level, then mixed with real whale songs and low-frequency radio static captured from decommissioned military antennas. The result was an auditory voyage, terrifying, alien, and sublime. Sound and light collapsed into each other until narrative dissolved altogether. This wasn't just future, it wasn't even reality. It was the moment where science fiction turned spiritual, passage through time, death, space, and self. Bowman doesn't scream, he doesn't speak, he sees, and in seeing is transformed, and so are we. The cosmic journey ends not in chaos, but in quiet. After the cascading lights of the Stargate, after the dissolution of language and time, Bowman arrives in a space that feels simultaneously ancient and unreal. A Louis XVI suite suspended in eternity. This new classical bedroom, with its glowing floor and sterile elegance, becomes the womb of the next evolution. Time falls in this space. Care dully ages without pain, without warning. Each transition punctuated only by glances. A man at a table becomes a man in bed, becomes something else entirely, turning a man's life into a silent metamorphosis, and then rebirth. The Star Child, Kubrick's final, silent enigma. It is both divine and grotesque, sublime and strange. Sculpted by Liz Morey, oversized skull was deliberately unsettling. A head too big for its body, like a being evolving ahead of itself. Inside were motorized glass eyes, lending it the uncanny stillness of something almost alive. The womb it hovered in wasn't digital. It was a rotating mylar balloon, spared with liquid nitrogen and lit from behind to produce a shimmering, translucent haze. In the film's final shot, the Star Child looks back at Earth, not with judgment, but with pure awareness. It's not an ending, it is a return, or perhaps an evolution, a closing of the loop that began with a bone hurled into the sky and ends with a gaze from the Star Child looking finally towards us. Kubrick doesn't explain, he never does, he simply shows, and in the silence that follows, we are left to contemplate the infinite, and still the film ends with black screen and classic music.
What is the ending? Why did Stanley design it the way he did? Is there an ending? That's the other thing. Is it a precursor to another film? Is it really the ending? The Star Child? Is the Star Child the beginning of the next evolution?
The alien narrative of 2001: A Space Odyssey is just a sleight of hand. It's just a deceivement of the true core meaning of the film. Kubrick's masterpiece is not an extraterrestrial gods guiding humans through their evolution. It is about, and you can find this a great or an idiot idea to say out loud, but believe me, I will just break it down and it's just gonna be clear as day. 2001: A Space Odyssey is about the evolutionary effect of cinema on humanity. That's a big statement, I know. But let us break it down. It is about cinema itself, a meta-commentary on the act of watching, creating, and transcending the boundaries of the screen. First, we're gonna state all the points that will finally lead you to be convinced that this is kinda one of the true meanings of 2001: A Space Odyssey. From the Bones anti-gravity arc to the film is littered with deliberate continuity errors. These are not oversights, but breadcrumbs. The vanishing sweater.
As a matter of fact, I've reserved a table for you on my flight for It's been about 7 or 8 months since you were here last week.
And the swaying flags in windless rooms all signaled a constructed reality. Kubrick deliberately fractures the illusion of narrative seamlessness to to remind us that this is just a film. The apes, the astronauts, and Hal are players on a stage. Their world meticulously orchestrated simulation. The monolith dimensions mirror the 17mm sober Panavision frame, the canvas of Kubrick's vision, when the apes circle it, when Bowman reaches towards its edge. They are confronting the screen itself. In the novel, Clarke describes the monolith as a teaching machine. But Kubrick rejected this literalism. Instead, it became a portal, a mirror, a doorway, not for the characters, but for the audience. And Kubrick states that we are looking into the monolith for 3 minutes at the beginning of the film. Each appearance of the monolith aligns with a shift in perspective. The apes scream at the monolith as viewers might scream at a primal, overwhelming cinema screen. The moon excavation, the slab's alignment with the horizon mirrors the widescreen frame. Its edges blend into the edges of our perception. Jupiter's orbit, the monolith floats sideways, a 90-degree rotation that tilts the audience axis, preparing us for the Stargate psychedelic repetition. The cosmic bedroom. Bowman's fingers hovers an inch from the monolith, an inch from the screen before the camera's finally breaks the fourth wall, exposing the set's artifice. The 90 degrees revolution. Kubrick obsessed over rotational shifts, the discovery that changes direction. Hal's eye, framed in a monolith-shaped panel, watches Paul jog in circles. Stargate sequence, where the screen itself rotates, collapsing vertical and horizontal planes into a void. The feedback screech what pierces the soundtrack. It's the howl of a projector lamp, the scream of a medium recognizing itself. And you can find the 90 degrees from the total beginning, as we stated, the Moon Watcher, when he just tilted his head of understanding, and the tilting of the monolith itself, and the tilting of the bone, and the tilting of the Stargate. And you can see clearly a reference to the cinema screen, as you can see 3 cinema screens behind him speaking in this shot. Music of the Void. Legity's Atmospheres plays over 3 black screens before the title, during the intermission, and after the credits. These are overtures to the audience's mind. The monolith theme, Requiem, evokes dread until its final sequence, where silence reigns. Bowman, now clad in white, needs no soundtrack. He has escaped the film's audiovisual prison. The crew of the Discovery did not dream in hypersleep, yet Bowman, reborn in the neon-lit bedroom, splashes real water, eats real meat, and ages in real time. This is Kubrick punchline, the dreamless. Astronauts are trapped in the film's sterile fiction, while Bowman awakens to the messy, organic reality of the viewer. The emergency revival instructions, a cheeky nod to the audience's role in resuscitating the narrative. In Clarke's novel, Bowman finds a TV above his bed, playing a documentary about Africa, the same footage that opens the film. Kubrick replaces it with a monolith. The message is clear. You're not watching a story, you're watching a mirror. The apes, Floyd, Hal, Bowman, they are us, groping at the edges of the screen, desperate to touch the light beyond. Even when Bowman found himself in that white palace, you can say, you can see in his eyes the look of realization. You can see in his eyes that he understood, that he knew that he is not in real life, that he's in a film. And when he goes to look at himself in the mirror, the perspective flips. We're not looking through his eyes, looking at himself in the mirror. We're looking through the reflection of him looking at himself. Maybe just another hint, maybe just another 90 degrees. And there are other clues. When Bowman was about just to reach the frame edge, a metaphor of being not applicable right now, but it hints him to glance at himself when he is ready, a glance at himself when he is much older. And at this point, we see him reaching again for something, reaching again, really, for the monolith. He can't touch it, it's so far away. And then the film breaks the fourth wall. This is the first time seeing the film from the set itself. We are looking through a wall, and in this perspective, Bowman is just an inch And he then touches the monolith in that 2D perspective. And when he understands that, everything's changed. The film ends not with aliens, but with a black screen and 4 minutes of silence. No answers, only questions. The monolith is not a god. It is the cinema, a tool for humanity to project its own myths, fears, and aspirations. As Kubrick said, no matter how vast the darkness, we must supply our own light. The final star child gazes at Earth. They're not us. It is not a symbol of alien ascendance, but of the audience's awakening. We are the creators, the destroyers, the ones who must rotate the monolith, the screen, and see it for what it is, a doorway waiting for our fingers to breach the frame. But after all of that, you would think that the first time that this movie is gonna be premiered, it will haunt people for ages. But that was not the case.
In New York City, a week later, and they were showing the film to industry elite and media, it was a disaster because the perception was this was a huge failure. This was a film that was on its way down. It was going to sink the studio, maybe.
The opening of 2001 was very frightening because we had all the executives sitting in the audience, very old, many of them, and they didn't understand the film at all and left, whole rows of them. And we were panic-stricken. Then there was an enormous, catastrophic meeting in our hotel room. And Stanley was so upset he lost his voice.
He told me that the first exhibitor screening of 2001 had, I believe he said, 241 walkouts. You know, this is, I'm sure he counted them too.
A lot of people didn't get it the first time round, and I'm really fond of quoting the MGM executive who said, well, that's the end of Stanley Kubrick.
It's true that young people gravitated to the film, but they did it from the first day. It was successful from the first day. It really sold tickets from the first day.
Radio started to report that, hey, there are crowds outside this theater. So they were craving this experience, especially younger audiences who at the time, young people were obsessed with the space program. And the film starts to build an audience, and a lot of them saw it in sort of 65 millimeter, right? 2001: A Space Odyssey is a shocking experience when you see it on the big screen.
And I sort of fell with clutching my handbag across my bed asleep because I hadn't slept all night. And woke up to the sounds of a DJ saying, this is the most fantastic film, and the people are queuing around the block. And he was talking about 2001. And I was desperately trying to ring Stanley to tell him, some people like it enormously. You know, it was just the Blue Rinse Brigade that walked out.
2001 received a National Catholic Award for its imaginative vision of man's creative encounter with the universe. 2001 also won an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. As the film's director and designer, Kubrick received his only ever Oscar.
It was that kind of process of personally taking possession of not only the people, the technology, the art, the craft of making movies. He was it. He embodied the whole thing, and he invited actors, cinematographers, production designers to come into his family and collaborate with him, which for some people was difficult.
I always thought I'd work with Stanley again. You know, we kept in touch over the years and everything and talked about other projects, and it's a sad thing that I won't have that great opportunity.
I miss him. How could one not miss him?
He felt extremely lucky to be in a situation where he could tell stories on such a large scale and millions of dollars involved. I think when he was young, he didn't dare hope he would be able to do that. I don't think he ever took that for granted. And he would often say to people, say, how are you doing, Stan? He said, I'm still fooling them.